The Grand Assembly Hall of the Aurelian Council was unlike anything the human delegation had ever seen. It was a cathedral of power, a monolithic structure of shimmering obsidian and crystalline arches that stretched high above the floating platforms where delegates from hundreds of species gathered. The golden sigil of the council, a perfect, rotating sphere encased in rings of ever-shifting light, hovered at the center of the chamber, a symbol of authority and permanence. For centuries, the Aurelian Council had ruled the galaxy, and now, for the first time, humanity stood before them, ready to claim its rightful place among the stars. Ambassador Elias Verrick adjusted the cuffs of his ceremonial uniform, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. Behind him, a dozen of Earth's finest scientists, economists, military strategists stood in rigid formation. They had all worked tirelessly for this moment. Humanity had followed every rule, met every requirement, and endured every trial dictated by the Codex of Advancement. They had proven their worth. He stole a glance at Dr. Anika Patel, one of Earth's foremost astrophysicists, who had been instrumental in humanity's technological leap forward. She met his gaze, giving a small nod of reassurance. They had earned this. At the center of the chamber, the High Chancellor of the Aurelian Council, a being known as Velsar of the First Radiance, raised a clawed hand for silence. The assembly quieted instantly. Ambassador Verrick of Earth, Velsar intoned, his voice smooth as polished glass. Your species has walked the path of advancement with diligence. You have obeyed our laws, honored our treaties, and contributed greatly to the galactic economy. By the decree of the Codex, we acknowledge your accomplishments. A ripple of murmurs swept through the assembly. Verrick held his breath. This was it, the moment they had fought for. You have requested full council membership, Velsar continued, his glowing eyes studying the humans with something that might have been amusement. And you believe you have earned it. Verrick straightened his posture. Not believe, Chancellor. We have earned it. By every metric of the Codex, humanity has met the criteria. Our scientific advancements have contributed to interstellar development. Our diplomatic efforts have strengthened galactic peace. Our economy has integrated seamlessly into the greater market. We have met every challenge, adapted to every requirement. The Codex is clear. Humanity qualifies for council status. Silence hung in the air for a moment. Then the Chancellor spoke. So you have? Verrick exhaled, relief flooding through him. The culmination of decades of work, the sacrifices of entire generations. It had all been worth it. But then Velsar smiled. It was a small thing, barely perceptible, but it sent a chill down Verrick's spine. However, the Chancellor said slowly, there is another truth that the Codex does not explicitly state. The murmurs in the assembly grew louder. Verrick frowned. What do you mean? Velsar spread his arms, his golden robes shimmering. We, the Aurelian Council, exist to ensure balance and order. The Codex is our guiding principle, yes, but it is not the only law by which we govern. There is an understanding among the Council, one that has stood for thousands of cycles. Verrick's hands curled into fists. Something was wrong. Velsar's next words shattered the illusion humanity had clung to for so long. You will never be allowed to join the Council, the Chancellor said, his voice smooth, unyielding, because the Council was never meant to be shared with lesser species. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Verrick felt as if the floor had been pulled from beneath him. He looked to Anika, who had gone pale. General Markov, Earth's highest-ranking military delegate, took a sharp breath, his fists tightening at his sides. 100 questions rushed through Verrick's mind, but only one made it to his lips. You mean the Codex was a lie? Velsar gave a soft chuckle, as though humoring an amusing child. No, the Codex is real. It is the path we allow species to follow. It ensures that they remain useful, that they contribute. But ascension? True power? That was never truly an option for you. Verrick couldn't breathe. Then why? Why make us believe? Because hope is the most efficient method of control, Velsar said simply. It is far more effective to have a species striving toward an unreachable goal than to crush them outright. You have played your role well, Ambassador Vuric. But now, your role is complete. Something inside Vuric snapped. That's bullshit. His voice echoed through the chamber, drawing shocked gasps from the gathered delegates. He stepped forward, eyes blazing with fury. We upheld every law. We played by your rules. We earned our place here. Velsar's expression remained serene. And yet, here you stand, powerless to change the truth. The weight of the Chancellor's words pressed down on them. It was all a lie. The system they had trusted, the rules they had followed, it had never been about fairness. The Aurelians had never intended to share their power. The Codex had been nothing more than a leash. Vuric clenched his jaw, trying to contain the storm of rage building inside him. Anika reached out, placing a hand on his arm, but he barely felt it. We have nothing more to discuss, Velsar said with finality. You are dismissed. The chamber doors rumbled open. The human delegation stood frozen, betrayal burning through them like wildfire. For decades, they had believed in the system. Now they saw the truth. As Vuric turned to leave, his mind was already racing. If the system was rigged, if the Council existed only to keep humanity and others beneath them, then there was only one possible response. The system had to fall, and humanity would be the ones to bring it down. The journey back to Earth's embassy on the capital world of the Aurelian Council was silent. The delegation, once filled with pride and anticipation, now sat in a cold, stunned silence aboard the diplomatic transport. Outside the window, the great expanse of the city stretched far and wide, a gleaming testament to the supposed fairness of the Council. But now, it was nothing more than a monument to a lie. Ambassador Elias Vuric stared out at the glowing spires of the alien metropolis, his mind a whirlwind of rage and disbelief. For decades, they had worked tirelessly, believing in the Codex, believing in the system. Now, all of it had been revealed as a sham. Across from him, Dr. Anika Patel sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The usually composed scientist was visibly shaken. I don't understand, she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. We did everything right. General Markov, Earth's senior military strategist, exhaled sharply through his nose. It was never about doing things right, Doctor. It was about keeping us in our place. His voice was laced with barely contained fury. They strung us along because it was useful, because it made us work harder, because it made us compliant. The rest of the delegation shifted uncomfortably, the weight of realization settling in. Vuric turned to them, his voice low but sharp. We were never meant to join them. The Codex isn't a ladder, it's a cage. Then what the hell do we do now? Asked one of the economists, his face pale. We've spent years integrating into their system. Our entire infrastructure is based on trade and agreements under the Codex. Vuric's jaw tightened. That was exactly the problem. Humanity had built its progress within the constraints of the Aurelian framework, believing that one day they would be allowed to stand as equals. Now, that dream was dead. The transport docked at the embassy. The doors hissed open, but no one moved. We should consider our response carefully, Anika finally said. If we act rashly, we've already lost, Doctor, Markov interrupted. They just told us to our faces that will never be allowed to advance. So tell me, what do we gain by continuing to play by their rules? Silence. Vuric finally stood. We don't gain anything, he said, which means the game is over. He turned to the delegation, his gaze sweeping over each of them. We tried it their way. Now we tried our way. The news of humanity's rejection did not remain contained for long. Within days, the announcement spread across human-controlled territories. At first, there was disbelief. Then, anger. The colonies, some of which had struggled for years to meet council requirements, erupted in outrage. Protests broke out in major spaceports. Furious messages flooded interstellar communication networks, and industrial sectors braced for an economic collapse. On Earth, the response was even more volatile. Political leaders who had long advocated for cooperation with the Council now faced public backlash. Military officials convened in emergency meetings. The scientific community, once deeply invested in council approval, now found themselves questioning everything they had worked for. The United Terran Coalition, humanity's governing body, held an emergency summit. Vuric, along with key members of the delegation, stood before Earth's highest-ranking officials, presenting what they had learned. The Aurelian Council was never going to let us rise, Vuric said. Everything we've built under their system was a lie. The Codex was designed to control us, not to elevate us. Then what do you suggest? One of the representatives asked. We've spent decades integrating into the interstellar economy. If we act rashly, we could isolate ourselves completely. They expect us to stay in the system because we need it, Vuric replied. But what if we stopped needing it? A hush fell over the chamber. What are you saying? Another official asked. I'm saying we don't need the Codex anymore, Vuric said. If they won't let us advance within their framework, then we stop playing by their rules. We build outside of it. We break every restriction they've placed on us. We take the technology they won't let us have. We forge alliances with other species trapped under the same system. We stop being their subjects and start being their rivals. The room filled with murmurs of uncertainty. That would mean war, an admiral said gravely. Vuric met his gaze. They declared war on us the moment they decided we were beneath them. Within weeks, a shift began. The first acts of defiance were subtle. Human scientists, once careful to adhere to Aurelian technological restrictions, began secretly experimenting with forbidden fields of research. Advancements in artificial intelligence, weaponry, and energy sources that the Codex had deemed too dangerous for lesser species. Independent trade organizations, furious at the betrayal, quietly severed their reliance on council-approved routes and began smuggling resources through black market channels. Diplomats, once hesitant to speak against the council, started reaching out to other species who had been denied ascension. They found allies among the disenfranchised, the silent, simmering anger of dozens of races who had also been promised advancement, only to be denied at the final moment. The council took notice. At first, they laughed. Humanity was insignificant compared to the might of the Aurelian Empire. A minor species, throwing a tantrum because they had been denied entry into a league they were never meant to be part of. They would learn their place soon enough. The council issued a warning. Any human found violating Codex regulations would be sanctioned. Trade routes would be restricted. Military advancements will be monitored. Any attempt to forge unauthorized alliances would be met with force. The Aurelians expected humanity to back down. Instead, they escalated. The first public act of defiance came when a human science vessel, the Newton's Gambit, openly broadcast its discovery of an advanced energy core that defied Aurelian limitations. The council immediately declared the research illegal. Instead of complying, humanity shared the discovery with dozens of other species. The second act came when a fleet of human cargo ships, previously restricted from trading high-value resources, bypassed the council's oversight entirely, smuggling goods through underground networks, establishing economic footholds in places the Aurelians never controlled. And the third act? The most dangerous of all? The signing of the Shadow Accords, a secret alliance between humanity and 3 other species who had also been denied ascension. It was a declaration of rebellion. The Aurelians still didn't take it seriously. They had crushed defiance before. What they didn't realize was that humanity wasn't simply resisting. They were preparing for war. The meeting took place in the dead of night, deep in the underbelly of a forgotten moon orbiting a gas giant on the edge of known space. It wasn't in a grand hall or a pristine diplomatic chamber, but in a rusted-out cargo bay where the hum of neglected machinery served as background noise. The leaders of the rebellion sat around a crude metal table, their faces illuminated by flickering hollow projectors. Elias Vuric stood at the head of the room, his expression grim. Beside him, General Markov kept his arms crossed, his posture stiff with barely contained anticipation. Across from them sat representatives from the 3 other species who had joined humanity's cause, the Veladari, the Oroshin, and the Drakthal. The Veladari, a feline-like species known for their speed and cunning, had been the first to answer humanity's call. Ambassador Scythal, her sleek black fur reflecting the dim light, watched Vuric carefully. Her people had played by the Codex's rules for even longer than humanity, and when they had finally reached the threshold of ascension, they had been denied, just as humanity had. The Oroshan, a reptilian race with large, hulking frames, had been used as laborers by the Council for centuries. Their representative, Lord Garrick, clenched his massive fists as he listened. His people had toiled under the false promise of freedom for generations. Now, they were ready to burn the system that had enslaved them. And then there were the Drakthul, the outcasts, the warlike nomads who had never fully accepted the Codex, but had been forced to comply with its rules. Their warlord, Kordak, grinned toothily from his seat. His people had never forgotten the wars the Council had waged to break them centuries ago. Now, at long last, the Drakthul had a chance for revenge. Vuric took a breath, then spoke. "We have all been deceived." A murmur of agreement. "We followed the Codex. We played by their rules. We gave them our loyalty. And in return, they made sure we would never rise above servitude." Scythal's golden eyes flashed. "We have known this truth for generations. We have waited for someone to challenge it." Vuric nodded. "The time for waiting is over." He tapped a button on the table, and a holographic map of the galaxy appeared, displaying the vast network of trade routes, military installations, and communication hubs controlled by the Aurelian Council. "The Council believes its control is unshakable," Vuric continued. "But they've built their empire on the assumption that we would never fight back. Every major trade route, every military stronghold, it all relies on the cooperation of the species they govern. If we take that away, the entire system collapses." Lord Garrick leaned forward, his reptilian features hard. "What do you propose?" Vuric met his gaze. "We take the first step. We break the chains." Kordak let out a harsh chuckle. "And how do you plan to do that, human? The Council has fleets, armies, an empire built on thousands of years of dominance. Do you have a plan to strike at them?" Vuric didn't hesitate. "Yes." The first move was not a grand battle or a bold declaration of war. It was a whisper in the dark. On the industrial world of Kelros 5, a planet rich with resources that fueled the Aurelian war machine, a quiet sabotage operation was underway. A team of human engineers, working under assumed identities, infiltrated the planetary refinery network. They were not soldiers, nor were they carrying weapons. Their tools were data spikes, viruses, and electromagnetic disruptors. Within minutes, the refinery's processing systems were thrown into chaos. Control systems failed, supply chains broke, and the raw materials that had once flowed seamlessly to Aurelian shipyards suddenly stopped. By the time the Council realized what had happened, the humans were gone. It was only the beginning. The second strike came on Velos Prime, an Aurelian-controlled communications hub that regulated interstellar transmissions across multiple sectors. A cyber attack, launched from an undisclosed human outpost, infiltrated their systems, rerouting key diplomatic transmissions and replacing them with carefully doctored messages that sowed confusion among the ruling elite. Within days, entire fleets were receiving conflicting orders. Supply lines faltered. Governors turned against each other, believing their rivals were staging betrayals. The Council had no idea who was responsible. The third strike, however, left no doubt. A heavily guarded convoy, carrying a shipment of experimental weaponry, was en route to an Aurelian military outpost when it disappeared without a trace. No distress signals, no wreckage, just silence. Hours later, a message was broadcast across secure Aurelian frequencies. "The Codex is broken. The chains are shattered. Your time is ending." The Council now understood. Humanity was not rebelling. They were waging war. The Aurelians were slow to act at first. They had grown complacent, believing their rule was absolute. By the time they realized the extent of the growing rebellion, humanity and its allies had already struck a dozen more times. The Council convened an emergency session. "This defiance cannot be tolerated," High Chancellor Velsar declared. Humanity must be crushed before others are emboldened by their actions. But it was already too late. Reports were flooding in from across the empire. Smuggling rings breaking trade restrictions, weapons manufacturers supplying rebel groups, dissident factions within other species suddenly rising in protest. The Aurelians had spent centuries ensuring their power remained unchallenged. Now, for the first time in history, they were facing an enemy they couldn't control. A species that did not fear them. A species that did not need them. A species that was prepared to burn their entire empire to the ground. And then came the news that sealed their fate. A second shadow accord had been signed, bringing 2 more disenfranchised species into the rebellion. The Council had laughed at humanity's defiance. Now, they were no longer laughing. The Aurelian Council had underestimated humanity. That was their first mistake. Their second mistake was believing that the rebellion could be contained. It had started as a whisper, covert sabotage, whispered alliances, stolen technology. But now, the movement had ignited into a wildfire. It spread across the galaxy faster than the Council could control, consuming every colony, every outpost, every oppressed species that had once lived in silent servitude under the Codex. What had once been a quiet defiance had become an all-out insurgency, and humanity was at the heart of it. The planet Jorvith 3 had been an unremarkable mining colony for centuries. Situated on the outer edges of Aurelian-controlled space, it had served as a resource hub, providing rare metals and minerals for the Council's vast empire. Its people, mostly Veladari laborers, had lived under the Codex's strict rule, never questioning their place. Until now, the first explosion tore through the central processing hub at dawn. A column of fire erupted from the heart of the city, sending shockwaves across the colony. Within moments, a second blast followed, this time at the main spaceport, grounding all Council ships before they could launch. By the time Aurelian security forces responded, the rebellion was already in full force. Veladari workers, armed with stolen Aurelian rifles and makeshift explosives, stormed the Council garrison. The Oroshun, with their immense strength, tore through barricades, dismantling enemy vehicles with their bare hands. The Drakthal, ever the warriors, moved with brutal efficiency, cutting down Aurelian soldiers before they could regroup. And then, from the sky, the final blow came. A fleet of human ships, small, fast, and heavily armed, descended upon the planet, bombarding key Council strongholds. They didn't stay to occupy. They didn't need to. By the time the dust settled, Jorvith 3 had fallen, the first Aurelian control planet to break free from the Codex. The news spread like wildfire. Within days, uprisings erupted across a dozen other colonies. Workers abandoned their posts. Supply lines were severed. Entire sectors plunged into chaos. The Council had ruled through control. Now, they were losing control. High Chancellor Velsar stood in the heart of the Grand Assembly Hall, his expression unreadable as he listened to the reports. Jorvith 3 has fallen. Velos Prime's communications network remains compromised. The Shadow Accords have expanded. 5 species are now actively working with the humans. Our trade fleets are being intercepted. Our outer colonies are refusing orders. One by one, his advisors deliver the news. One by one, the signs of collapse became undeniable. This, one of the counselors, a member of the insectoid Chalvek, clicked its mandibles in agitation. This cannot be happening. No species has ever defied the Council in such a way. Velsar turned his glowing golden eyes toward them. No species has ever been this reckless. His advisors flinched. They believe they are untouchable, Velsar continued. They believe they can break the Codex. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. They are mistaken. What do you propose, Chancellor? Another counselor asked. Velsar looked out over the assembly. The symbols of power that had once seemed so absolute, the gleaming banners, the golden sigil of the Council, now felt fragile. It was an illusion, he told himself. The Council had ruled for millennia. They had crushed rebellions before. But deep in his mind, for the first time, a whisper of doubt crept in. We will remind humanity why the Council rules this galaxy, he said at last. The full force of the Council will be unleashed. The Council wasted no time. Within a week, they launched a massive counterattack, Operation Dominion, designed to crush the rebellion before it could spread any further. Their first target, Elysium 9, a human-controlled colony on the outskirts of rebellion territory. Elysium 9 was one of humanity's most vital strongholds. It was a technological hub, housing some of the most advanced research labs and military manufacturing facilities. The Council sent an entire armada, 20 warships, 3 dreadnoughts, and a battalion of elite ground forces. They expected an easy victory. Instead, they walked into a trap. The human fleet had been waiting. The moment the Council's ships arrived, hidden minefields detonated in space, crippling the lead dreadnought. Electronic warfare systems flooded the enemy's communication channels, cutting off their ability to coordinate. And then, the human warships attacked. They were smaller, faster, more maneuverable than their Aurelian counterparts. Using precise hit-and-run tactics, they tore through the Council's fleet, targeting engines, weapons systems, and command centers. The battle lasted 6 hours. By the time it was over, 14 Aurelian ships had been destroyed, 2 dreadnoughts were crippled, and the remaining fleet was forced to retreat. For the first time in history, the Council had suffered a major military defeat. And worse, it had been at the hands of the very species they had deemed unworthy. The defeat at Elysium 9 sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Other species, ones that had once hesitated to join the rebellion, now saw the truth. The Council was not invincible. The Codex was not absolute. Within days, entire factions within the Council's own military defected, refusing to fight for a system that had lied to them. Governors abandoned their posts, fleeing into hiding as their planets fell into chaos. World after world rose in rebellion. The Aurelian Council had ruled through the illusion of power. Now that illusion was breaking. Velsar stood in his chambers, staring at the latest reports. Elysium 9 had been a disaster. The rebellion was no longer a series of isolated uprisings. It was a full-scale revolution. For the first time in thousands of years, the Council faced an enemy it could not control. For the first time, they felt fear. In a hidden war room on an undisclosed human stronghold, Elias Vurix studied the holomap of the galaxy. The rebellion had gained momentum faster than he had expected. The Council was reeling. Now came the final phase. "We've crippled their supply chains," General Markov said. "We've won major battles. But we're still not at the endgame." Vurix nodded. "Not yet." Anika Patel leaned forward. "Then what's our next move?" Vurix's eyes burned with determination. "We don't just fight the Council." He turned to the holomap, where the Aurelian homeworld glowed at the center. "We end them." The Aurelian Council had ruled for thousands of years. They had crushed rebellions before. They had exterminated entire civilizations that dared to defy their laws. They had rewritten history so thoroughly that no species even considered resistance a viable option. And yet, here they stood, watching their empire crumble. World after world had fallen. The Codex of Advancement, once the sacred law that dictated the fate of every species, now lay in ruins. And at the heart of the storm stood humanity. The rebellion had spread like a plague. Entire planetary systems had declared their independence. The Council's war fleets were stretched thin, forced to fight on too many fronts at once. But even as their empire burned, the Aurelians refused to surrender. High Chancellor Velsar gathered his remaining warlords in the Grand Assembly Hall, the golden banners of the Council hanging above them like relics of a dying age. The massive chamber, once filled with hundreds of delegates from countless species, was now nearly empty. Many had fled. Many more had been killed. Only the most fanatical of the Aurelian leadership remained. "We cannot allow this insurrection to continue," Velsar said coldly. "The rebellion must be crushed, no matter the cost." One of the warlords, a towering insectoid known as Zervax, hissed in frustration. "The humans have taken 47 systems. Their allies have crippled our supply lines. We are losing entire fleets to ambushes. Velsar narrowed his glowing eyes. Then we escalate. A silence fell over the chamber. A second warlord, the reptilian Varric Toll, frowned. Escalate how, Chancellor? Velsar's voice was like steel. We stop playing by their rules. He gestured toward a hollow display in the center of the chamber. It flickered to life, revealing targeted extermination plans for key human colonies. A murmur of shock spread through the remaining council members. We burn their homeworlds, Velsar said. We remind them what it means to defy the council. The Aurelians wasted no time. A council dreadnought fleet, the largest they had mustered since the rebellion began, descended upon Terra Nova, one of humanity's strongest colony worlds. The assault was brutal. Aurelian warships glassed entire cities, leveling them in waves of fire. Civilian evacuation ships were shot down before they could escape. Ground forces, ruthless and unrelenting, executed anyone who resisted. By the time the smoke cleared, millions were dead. The council broadcast the massacre across the galaxy, issuing a simple message. This is what happens to those who defy us. But if Velsar had hoped to break humanity, he had made a fatal mistake. He had only made them angrier. The attack on Terra Nova became the rallying cry of the war. It was no longer just about freedom. It was about justice. It was about vengeance. Humanity answered in kind. Within days, a counterstrike was launched against the Aurelian world of Vorka Prime, a strategic military outpost deep within Council space. But this time, humanity didn't just fight. They obliterated. Coordinated AI-driven cyber warfare crippled planetary defenses. A fleet of cloaked strike ships infiltrated the atmosphere, launching precise orbital bombardments on every major command center. Aurelian leadership begged for reinforcements. None came, because at the same time, the Veladari, the Oroshan, and the Drakthal launched simultaneous uprisings in 3 other systems. It was a coordinated death blow to the Council's military infrastructure. Vorka Prime, once a symbol of Aurelian military dominance, was razed to the ground. For the first time, an Aurelian world had fallen. And that was when it happened. The Council began to turn on itself. Velsar's iron grip on the Council began to slip. Many non-Aurelian species within the governing body, seeing the writing on the wall, abandoned the Council altogether. Some of them even defected to the rebellion, offering inside intelligence on key Council weaknesses. Others, desperate to save themselves, attempted to negotiate with the rebels, only to find that humanity was no longer interested in diplomacy. The Aurelian leadership began to splinter. Some warlords, believing the war was lost, fled into exile. Others, too proud to surrender, continued to fight a losing battle. And in the midst of it all, Velsar refused to accept defeat. "The Council does not fall," he growled. "We are the rightful rulers of this galaxy." But deep inside, he knew the truth. The Council was already dead, and soon, the galaxy would belong to humanity. In a hidden war bunker on a liberated world, Elias Verrick stood before a hollow map of the Aurelian homeworld. It was the last bastion of the Council's power, the final piece of their empire. General Markov exhaled. "They'll never surrender." "They don't have to," Verrick said. His voice was cold, determined. "We're going to end them." The final assault was planned. Humanity and its allies would descend upon the Aurelian capital world in a coordinated planetary invasion. The war had started with betrayal. Now it would end with fire. And when it was over, the Aurelian Council, once the unchallenged rulers of the galaxy, would be no more. Humanity had not only broken the Codex, they had shattered it beyond repair. And now they were writing their own laws. The Aurelian homeworld, Celestis Prime, had never been touched by war. For thousands of years, it had stood as the unchallenged seat of power, a world of towering golden spires, impossibly advanced technology, and an atmosphere of absolute control. The planet's defenses were said to be impenetrable. Its orbital fleet was the largest ever assembled. No enemy had ever set foot on its soil. Until now, for the first time in history, Celestis Prime was under siege. The rebellion's fleet, a combined force of human warships, Veladari raiders, Orosian dreadnoughts, and Drakthul battle cruisers, descended upon the Aurelian capital in a coordinated assault. They came from all sides, overwhelming the Council's last remaining warships. The battle in space was brutal. Humanity's newest warships, outfitted with forbidden Aurelian technology that had once been denied to them, tore through the enemy lines. A single human destroyer, the UTS Vengeance, rammed straight into an Aurelian command ship, tearing it apart in a blinding explosion. Drakthul shock troopers landed on Aurelian defense stations, slaughtering every last officer who dared resist. Veladari stealth ships infiltrated planetary defenses, disabling their shield generators before the ground invasion even began. By the time the battle shifted to the planet's surface, Celestis Prime's fate was already sealed. On the ground, the Aurelian elite fought with desperation. Velsar had ordered his warlords to defend the capital to the last breath. He refused to accept defeat. Thousands of Aurelian soldiers held the streets, their plasma rifles burning through the night as they fought back against the invading forces. But they were outnumbered. They were outmatched. And worse, they were afraid. They had never faced an enemy like this. An enemy that fought not for conquest, but for justice, for vengeance. And then, the gates of the Grand Assembly Hall fell. Humanity had reached the Council's throne. In the heart of the crumbling city, Velsar stood atop the ruined steps of the Grand Assembly Hall, his golden robes stained with blood. The once great leader of the Aurelian Council now looked like a relic of a dying empire. Elias Vuric, flanked by General Markov and a squad of heavily armed human soldiers, stepped forward. Velsar's glowing golden eyes burned with hatred. "You have no right to be here," he spat. Varric's expression was cold, unforgiving. "We have every right." Velsar's hands clenched into fists. "The Codex was law," he growled. "You cannot rewrite the laws of the galaxy." Vuric stepped closer. "The Codex is dead." Velsar let out a low, furious hiss. "You think this is victory?" He gestured toward the burning city behind him. "This is chaos. You are not liberators. You are destroyers." Vuric didn't blink. "You called us lesser." His voice was like steel. "You denied us our place. You made the rules impossible to follow. And now, you are the ones who are beneath us." Velsar bared his teeth. "You think you can rule? You think you can control what comes next?" Vuric stared at him for a long moment. Then, without another word, he raised his sidearm and pulled the trigger. Velsar's body crumpled to the ground, his lifeless eyes still wide with disbelief. The last High Chancellor of the Aurelian Council was dead, and with him, the empire he had built. The death of Velsar was broadcast across the galaxy. The Council's rule was officially over. What remained of the Aurelian elite surrendered. Some fled into exile, hoping to escape the new order. Others were executed for their crimes. The Aurelian banners that had once flown over thousands of worlds were torn down. The Codex of Advancement, once considered the ultimate law of civilization, was publicly burned in the ruins of the Grand Assembly Hall. For the first time in millennia, the galaxy was free. With the Council gone, a power vacuum remained. Would humanity replace the Aurelians? Would they establish a new empire? Or would they create something different? In the months following the fall of the Council, the leaders of the rebellion gathered once more. This time, not as insurgents, but as architects of a new future. "We have done what we set out to do," Vuric said. "The Council is gone. The Codex is no more." Markov folded his arms. "But what now?" The room was silent. Then Anika Patel spoke. "We don't replace them. We build something better." And with that, humanity began to write the first pages of a new galactic order. One without the Codex. One without overlords. One where every species had the right to rise. The war was over. But the real work was only beginning. The collapse of the Aurelian Council had sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The once unshakable empire, whose rule had spanned thousands of years, was now nothing but a footnote in history. The Codex, the system of laws that had governed the rise and fall of species across the galaxy, was in tatters. The idea that only a select few were worthy of advancement had been shattered. Now it was time to rebuild. Humanity's leaders, having led the charge to dismantle the council, found themselves at the center of a new gathering. The Assembly of Liberation, a collection of representatives from hundreds of species, was convening on Jorvith III, the first world to fall to the rebellion. The planet was no longer the mining colony it once was. Now it stood as a symbol of what could be achieved when the bonds of oppression were broken. Elias Vuric stood at the center of the assembly hall, facing the representatives of the galactic powers who had joined humanity in its fight for freedom. The Veladuri, the Aurelian, the Drakthal, and countless other species were present. For the first time, the galaxy was united, not under the banner of an empire, but under the ideals of self-determination and mutual respect. Today, we stand together not as subjects, but as equals, Vuric began, his voice carrying through the vast chamber. We've torn down the system that kept us divided. The Aurelian Council, the Codex, it is all gone. Now, it is time to decide what comes next. The room was filled with anticipation. There is no longer a singular authority, no longer a single species to dictate the future. Humanity's victory had brought freedom, but with it came a new responsibility, to lead without ruling, to govern without domination. What do we build? Anika Patel, now a leading voice in the new Interstellar Council, stood beside Vuric. Her face was lit with resolve. This galaxy has suffered enough under tyrannical systems, under the guise of order and advancement. We must forge a path that is truly free, one that ensures no species is ever again told they cannot rise, that they are not worthy of the stars. The assembly members murmured their agreement, the words of liberation and hope filling the air. But there was also uncertainty. After so many years of oppression, after centuries of being forced to comply with a brutal system, how could they ensure that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated? How do we stop the same cycle from repeating? Lord Garrick, the Aurelian warlord, asked, his voice heavy with the weight of his people's history. We are free now, yes. But what stops us from becoming the new Aurelians? Vuric met his gaze. We stop it by remembering what we fought for. We fought not just for freedom from the Aurelians. We fought for a future where no species ever has to fight for their right to rise. We fought for a galaxy where no one is held back by an unjust set of rules, where no one is told they are not worthy. The room grew quiet, the enormity of the challenge settling in. Then, the Drakthal warlord, Kordak, stepped forward, his enormous frame casting a shadow over the assembly. What is this new order, human? What will we call it? How will we know if we have achieved what we desire? Vuric nodded, understanding the question. We will call it the Union of Free Species, a council of equals where every species has a voice, where every species has the right to their own destiny. And we will know we've achieved it when every species, no matter their size or strength, is given the opportunity to advance on their own terms. There was a long pause, then a chorus of agreement. The Union of Free Species would be the new foundation of the galaxy, a place where species could collaborate, share knowledge, and rise together, without the shackles of the Codex. The reconstruction of the galaxy had begun. The work was slow, and at times it seemed impossible. There were disagreements, arguments, and competing ideologies. Some species sought power, others sought peace. Some wanted to maintain their independence, while others wished for deeper unity. The balance between individual rights and collective responsibility was delicate. But humanity, now at the forefront of the reconstruction effort, understood the stakes. Anika Patel had become the lead architect of the new Codex, a set of principles that would guide the union of free species. Unlike the old Codex of Advancement, this new version was not about rank or ascension, but about equity and opportunity. We will ensure that no one is left behind, Anika said, speaking to a panel of galactic delegates. The Union will provide resources and support for species that wish to rise, but it will never impose limits. Advancement will be determined by the will and capability of each species, not by arbitrary laws. The Codex was not a tool for oppression, but a framework for collaboration. It would ensure that no one species could dominate or exploit another. It would guarantee that resources were shared, that technology was exchanged, and that knowledge flowed freely across the galaxy. There were difficult moments, as many species still held remnants of the old belief that some were inherently superior to others. But with time, these beliefs were challenged and discarded. The idea that all species were equal, regardless of their origins or capabilities, became the cornerstone of the new system. And so, the union of free species began to take shape. Years passed, and the galaxy began to heal. The scars of the Council's reign faded, replaced by the vibrant new life of cooperation and mutual respect. Trade routes flourished without the heavy hand of the Council's restrictions. New alliances were forged, and former enemies became partners in the great galactic community. Humanity, once relegated to the role of the lesser species, had taken its rightful place among the stars, not as rulers, but as leaders in a new era. The union of free species was not perfect. No system ever was. But it was fair. It was built on the principles of equality and mutual respect. It was a system where every species had a voice, where every species could rise on their own terms. As Vuric stood on the balcony of the new council hall, now a symbol of the unity the galaxy had achieved, he looked out at the stars, thinking about all they had fought for and all they had yet to accomplish. The galaxy was no longer a place ruled by ancient, unjust powers. It was a place where every species had the chance to write its own future. And humanity, once relegated to the shadows, had played a pivotal role in creating this new reality. It was a future worth fighting for, and it was just beginning.